arrested, brutalized, threatened. For what? For supporting their unhoused neighbors. Well, that's what my guests on today's OShow put out in a statement when the charges against them were finally dropped. SAHRA Jama and SAHRA SOUDI are here today to tell us about why they put their bodies on the line to help their unhoused neighbors in encampments, and what they're willing to do going forward, and what we as a city need to be doing to help fix this crisis of houselessness and encampments. An issue which I've already seen being weaponized. Can you just tell us, for those viewers who are maybe just tuning into this story, a little bit, Sarah Jama, I'll start with you, about what happened that led to the charges, and then how you reacted when you learned that the charges were finally going to be dropped.
So on November 24th, 2021, there was a fire at J.C. Beamer Park at one of the tents that belonged to an encampment resident. A lot of people's belongings burned down in the fire, and at that time, bylaw had issued an eviction notice to everybody who was living at the park. Residents had asked members of the Encampment Support Network, who had shown up initially with clothes and supplies for support, to stay. We were asked to leave, and things escalated. Police got really aggressive. Particular people were dragged across the park grounds. Roa had a knee put into her neck, and 6 people in total were arrested simply for staying at the park. And one thing I always think about a lot is a couple weeks after that, there was a protest in Toronto in front of Premier Ford's house, where there was also a barricade set up that protesters crossed, and they were given a verbal warning. Whereas for us, we crossed the yellow tape at the request of encampment residents who wanted us to stay, and we were met with force and brutality. So we were charged with assault and obstruction of justice. I got a charge of assault and obstruction of justice, and I think SAHRA did too.
Yeah.
Was it both? And then a couple weeks ago, an additional charge of assault was added onto my file specifically. I'm not sure why, but it turns out HPS said they forgot an additional charge of assault. Keeping in mind that I'm in a wheelchair and it's very difficult to assault anybody, even if I had the intention to, which I didn't, they took it upon themselves to add an additional charge. Anyway, we ended up signing a peace bond, which says that we're not going to cross yellow tape again, and we're going to protest peacefully up until November 24th, 2022. It's worth noting that none of us intended to get arrested. Every single protest we've been a part of has been peaceful, and it's already a criminal offense to cross yellow tape. So if we were to do that anyway, with or without the peace bond, it's likely charges would get laid. So this entire process has been a series of semantics.
Wow. In part of the statement that I saw from that the court issued, they talked about that you had all learned your lessons. and I'd like to know, Sarah, just before I move on to SAHRA, what lessons have you learned?
I don't know why they put that in there, because initially what I looked at, there was an agreement to fault from both parties. And I have an email from Chief Gert where he explicitly says that the police could have and should have responded differently when he was communicating with Black leaders in our community. He said that, right? And so for them to put in writing that we acknowledge fault, that part I really don't understand, because I didn't think it was going to end up that way. And when we were talking about the peace bond with our lawyer, we tried to put it in that there were serious injuries on our side. And it turned out that like the HPS's lawyer or the prosecutor was just like, no, we can't talk about serious injury because one of the police officers is still being checked out for his foot that I allegedly ran over. So it's all like semantics. It all doesn't really make sense. In terms of us recognizing we were at fault, I don't think we were at fault. I think this was just like semantics in front of the court. I do think the police escalated, and we could see that in comparison with like the convoy in Ottawa, right? And how chill the police were with protesters who were literally wanting and desiring to overthrow their state. Whereas for us, we were just trying to hand out supplies. So I don't know. The legal process is messy.
Yeah, and I want to get back to that and to the police reaction because you mentioned the former police chief, Chief Gert. I want to know what Chief Bergen, who did a video about this right after it happened, what he had to say, right?
I mixed them up. I met Chief Bergen. Bergen was the one who was like, we could have responded differently.
Okay, but he put out a video from his office in full uniform, I believe, with his sidearm, the weekend that this all blew up, saying, that the police acted responsibly, or I don't want to paraphrase for him, but it was definitely not acknowledging that police could have done differently at the time. So has there been a softening there, Sarah, or an awareness, do you think, by the police that they got this wrong?
I don't think so. I think that Chief Bergen is worried about his relationship with the Black community. Mm-hmm. A lot of community members stood up and said that how they conducted themselves were wrong. And I think that's why he put in writing that he believes that they could have responded differently. And he was interested in quote unquote restorative justice. A peace bond is not restorative justice. And just because we signed a peace bond, it doesn't mean the work is going to stop or that encampment eviction defenses are going to stop. Like, this work is more than just the 6 of us, and it'll continue.
So, Sarah, I don't know how old you are, and I'm not going to ask you on TV, but you look young. And what was the experience like for you getting arrested, months of having those charges? I mean, one of the things that angered me so much is that it might impact your future and your ability to have employment and having a permanent record. I mean, it seemed like such a heavy-handed response to that day. So how did it feel for you when you got those charges laid? How was your family with it? How did you cope? And what did you feel when the charges were dropped?
Yeah, I mean, I was traumatized. It was trauma. I did undergo some serious injuries. I did sustain an ankle and wrist injury. Also including the trauma that I had to go through, thinking, at one point I heard someone say "tase her" when I was on the ground at JC Beamer being dragged. And so it's been a really tough time. And I did undergo an investigation with the SIU, which essentially came back and said that I wasn't seriously injured. But that was no surprise, as we know that the SIU and the courts are usually not in our favor. They're built and designed to criminalize us, to harm us. And so it wasn't surprising to see that outcome. Yeah, I don't know. I was just deeply upset. It did hinder my ability to do work with the Hamilton Encampment Support Network for some time. And that was deeply upsetting, though the work continues and lives on with or without me.
What got you involved in the first place? Because I think, as I said off the top of the show, the issue is being weaponized in our community. There's a municipal election coming up, and the issue of encampments is going to be weaponized. In fact, as one of the OShow producers said to me before I started taping this program, the empathy of Hamiltonians for our unhoused neighbors is being weaponized. And it's going to be weaponized against progressive candidates for council, as though somehow by having empathy for the unhoused in a homeless and a housing crisis in our country is somehow wanting to have encampments all over the city and people living in tents. And so I want to ask you, Sarah, how did you get involved in taking action to help your unhoused neighbors? What prompted you to do it, to take that kind of risk, to literally put your body in front of them being evicted that day?
Yeah, I'll start by saying that I was present at the Ferguson teardown, I believe in 2020, in the fall. And that was the first time that I realized that the city does not care about poor people. The city does not care about unhoused people. And it was deeply upsetting to witness this on several days of torrential downpour. People were being forced to move with no dignified option. There was a young Somali man who has since passed away that I met there. I'm also Somali, and so we connected and related to a certain degree.
He was your age too.
He was my age. We were both 25, and so yeah, I think that's one thing that ignited that conviction. Then I will also say that I have a personal experience of being unhoused and with housing insecurity. For the first 8 years of my life, I was unhoused, and so that unlocked a lot of memories for myself, and which is also something that inspired Freedom Camp when we were calling for the defunding of the police and the reinvestment into housing supports, as our city is, and most cities across Turtle Island are going through housing crises. And so that is something that inspired me on a deep level. And you're right, I did put my body on the line, understanding that state repression is at an all-time high. I believe that it takes just as much energy to live and suffer and struggle in this world as it does to try and fight for a better one. And so no matter the outcome, no matter the repercussion, I'm going to continue to show up and put my body on the line for what I believe in. I believe that unhoused people deserve dignified living spaces. I believe that unhoused people deserve the right to their autonomy and choices. And yeah, I'll continue to do the work where I can. 9 months will come up like that, and I'm sure I'll be back at it again in other ways.
Well, you're not banned from parks anymore, right? Because that was one of the ludicrous conditions that were initially put on all of you. When I hear your story, and I'm sorry for the loss of your friend, you know, and it brings to mind again and again that we're talking about people here. We're talking about people without choices who deserve dignity. You know, there are rent evictions happening all over this city.
Shelters are full. Like, I believe there are no more spaces for couples. That went away. And also, there has been a memo sent to council that has not yet been put on any agenda, from my understanding, of shelters being full, and like shelters asking for more supports because there's no space to send people. And the hotels specifically, the hotel spots are being taken up by tourist spaces. And so the shelters are being forced to evict people from the hotel spots now. And that wasn't a situation a year ago. That also is being put on the council agenda in the next couple of weeks. But yeah, shelter workers are just wondering what they're supposed to be doing when you have a council that says there's shelter spots and shelter spaces are literally full. There's no solution. And so more and more people are moving into the escarpment.
It's not as though if they're not downtown, they're not still living rough, right? There's nowhere to go. So I got to ask you, Sarah, you know, what do we need the city to do? What do we need the city to do? Because as I mentioned, this idea that people who are fighting for the dignity of people in encampments somehow want a proliferation of encampments in this city, that false narrative, that fear-mongering, that weaponization of the issue, I'm worried about it. So what do you, as someone who supports people and their dignity, and SAHRA, you who supports the dignity of the unhoused, what do you actually want the city to do?
I think every city councilor would agree that housing is a human right. Like, that's not new language. If you ask people if that's a thing, everyone will agree. So we need to put that into policy. We need a city housing Hamilton with teeth. It shouldn't just be sitting there. We need to actually be like ceasing the selling of land to developers that's going to sit empty because many of us can't afford, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars that go toward condos. Stop that. Expropriate housing that is empty, which is policy that's being investigated in almost every municipality now. It's not a new conversation. How can we take back land or use publicly owned land by the city to put that into housing and build? There are grants available federally and provincially that can be put toward funding, and things like the gas tax, carbon tax, shouldn't be put toward the slush fund of every single councillor, which it continues to happen, right? How can we use the money that we do have to budget toward housing? And the problem is we're not prioritizing housing. What we're prioritizing is entertainment districts and things that nobody asks for. What people are asking for is a place to live, and that needs to be a priority at council through our budgeting process.
So just for the absolute clear record, then, you are not for more encampments in the city popping up and
Nobody
sustaining encampment.
is. No one is.
We're for housing, dignified housing.
Yeah, but we're not for the policing of people living in tents either when there's no other option.
Yeah.
Like, we're tired of policymakers lying and saying that they're shelter spots. That's not the case.
Yeah, and just to note, after the events of J.C. Beamer, not everyone was offered housing, and those who were offered temporary housing were spit back outside just a few days later.
Yeah, and one of the encampment residents, John, he was put in a hotel, sure, and that was funded by the Friendship Center, right? But there was no food. Like, we were still dropping off food.
Yeah, we went to grocery stores to drop off food because they weren't being offered food.
And the other person is on the streets right now, like the person who had all these things burned down. There's no options.
So, Sarah Jama, you are also the executive director of the Hamilton, or of the Justice Disability Network of Ontario, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And Sarah, SOUDI, I'm not sure what other work that you do other than this.
I'm the program coordinator at DJNO.
Okay, so how do you both manage to feed the unhoused that the city might have put up in a hotel but have no food, be at these encampments, put out these messages of people to support these evictions? I mean, how do you do all this work and do your other work and go through the trauma of these arrests and the brutality of the arrests? I mean, I just want to understand, because sometimes I see you getting vilified or demonized, and I think that's just craziness, right? Like, you're doing the work of angels that most of us are too preoccupied or lazy or indifferent to do. So how do you manage that balance, Sarah, SOUDI?
I mean, I guess, well, for one, I don't see it as angel work. I see it as like this principled idea that we can't all be free unless unhoused people don't like are being criminalized. Like, if Indigenous people are also being evicted from this land, like, I operate and believe that our liberation movements are inherently intertwined with each other. And so it's this understanding that we all need each other.
And that allows you to take your spare time?
No, it doesn't in a way, but I just don't see it as angel work. I see it more as like mutual aid, because these are also services and things that I need or will need at one point in my life. And I will also say that it doesn't happen alone. Like, we don't do this work alone. We have an entire support system and a community that does this work with us. Like, the entire creation of the Hamilton Encampment Support Network were people who were also at Ferguson, were people who were also at Freedom Camp. So it doesn't happen by ourselves.
Yeah, and also all of these issues are so connected, right? Like, most of the encampment residents that we've been helping or supporting, like, a lot of them have disabilities too. Hamilton has the largest density of disabled people in the province per capita. And the people who are living in encampments are people who've also been banned from shelters for being disabled. Because if you're too disruptive, which is an ableist term, you don't belong in the shelter, they kick you out, right? Or, as council now says, high acuity, whatever that means. It's simple terminology to say that this person is disabled and needs extra supports. And so it's very connected to the work that, like, all these issues are connected. Ableism and the housing crisis and food insecurity. The people that are the most impacted tend to be like disabled people, racialized people, people who are living in, like, below the poverty line and who are living on social assistance, but who still can't pay rent. And a lot of us are close to that. Like, a lot of us have 2 jobs, 3 jobs, and you work 40, 50, 60 hours a week, and you still wonder, like, can you make rent at the end of the month? I think that applies to so many different people. Yeah. So if this other work didn't exist, like, I don't know what a lot of us would do in the future.
Yeah.
And I think that's what drives a lot of us too. It's not just about feeling good about it. It's like, these are the infrastructures communities need in order to support each other when things get really bad.
It's about survival for you.
Yeah, it's about dreaming about a future where we can all exist and survive.
SAHRA, you're politically very savvy. You've been on this program not just in the capacity of your advocacy work, but also as a strategist. You understand the map. You understand the upcoming election. I have to ask you, as I always do, are you going to run for mayor?
I'm not fully decided yet, but I'm thinking about it.
And you'll tell us here on the OShow, I'm sure. I'm sure you'll do the OShow if you're running, right? So what do you feel, though, whether you run for mayor or not, how do you feel about what I'm just kind of, I think, warning the city about, if residents aren't already aware of it or citizens haven't already seen it, that the narrative that supporting the dignity and the safety of people who are unhoused, who have to be in these tents because there's nowhere else to go, there's no room at the inn, is somehow an endorsement of encampments. There's a lot of fear-mongering, I think, that's going to happen, Sarah, where we're going to hear people say, you know what, more progressive candidates, well, they supporting the streets being full of tents, and they support, you know, no policing, and they support, and all these things are going to come out. How do you feel about the houseless issue being potentially weaponized in that way?
The goal, I think, of this municipal election should be to provide a compelling alternative of what Hamilton could and should look like, which is like not just encampment defenses, but also what we've done around caremongering, where we were able to feed over 7,000 families, and creating an assistive devices library where people can just come in and take equipment that they need. Like, it's also about showing what is possible, and I think that's the conversation that should be centered in Hamilton. It's not like, let's get rid of all the tents. It's what's possible around housing. What can we invest in to make sure no one has to live in the encampments? But we got stuck in this narrative of, you know, defense, 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 and not building a compelling alternative. And so I think that's what's exciting about this municipal election. No matter who runs, it's a space for progressives to actually talk about ideas and budgeting for those ideas, rather than what we're doing now, which is a small amount of people with no resources. Like, if we could rent a bunch of rooms for people, which we rented a couple, then we would, right? And the encampments wouldn't exist, but we don't have that budget. But the election offers this opportunity to brainstorm, okay, what is possible and how do we pay for it? And so I think it's going to be a really exciting conversation either way.
I love your optimism, as always. You know, so often people paint activists in this community as being negative, but you're the most optimistic people that I ever get to talk to, because you're actually fighting for a better city with your bodies and your time and your money. Sarah SOUDI, do you have hope that this election might bring that kind of change? Because you said here on the program, and it really punched me in the gut, that you realized early that Hamilton doesn't care about the unhoused, and that breaks my heart. I can't see any evidence to disagree with your thesis. I mean, obviously we don't seem to. We bully them, and we criminalize them, and we evict them, and we throw their stuff in the trash in the pouring rain. I mean, we are not a city that has shown any compassion. But do you have hope that this election might change things?
I do. I mean, I have to hope that I do in a way.
I hope that you have hope. Okay.
I hope that I have hope, and I really want to see some change. And I don't know. We have to elect the right people to do it.
Yeah.
And if that's this upcoming cycle, then let's do it. And if that doesn't work, then let's burn it down. Like, right. something has to change.
And by burn it down, I know you're speaking metaphorically. When you say, like, if it doesn't happen this cycle, burn it all down. Like, if we aren't able, Hamilton, to get more people out to vote, to get more people to believe that there's alternatives and that there are other choices available and that the city can be better, to move away from the long-term incumbents and say we need people with new ideas and, innovation. If that doesn't happen, Sarah SOUDI, what does burn it down mean to you? Like, what do we do as a city? Because I'm 50-50. I'm worried. I'm worried that we're going to end up right back where we started.
Yeah, that was a metaphor. Figure of speech. Well, I just like what Sarah said about imagining what's possible. It's like reimagining what's possible if it doesn't work out this time around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also I think let's not. I think the problem with Hamilton is most of the work should happen in between cycles. The elections are never the end-all be-all. That's a platform to talk about great ideas and perhaps institute some change. But even if you get progressives inside the like if you get progressives elected, like which I've helped a couple of progressives get elected, it doesn't mean that change will occur, right? You still need a good amount of people on the outside of the system to be pushing for change and instituting that on our own. I think that comfortable people often put all of their eggs in the electoral basket because it's comfortable, right? It's a way to challenge power that doesn't really take too much out of you as an individual. There's way more work to be done outside of these cycles. I think this cycle offers an opportunity for us to engage at a table that we're normally not a part of. Like, we have to beg for the mayor to come outside. We have to beg for this councillor to move a motion. Elections are about not begging anymore because they need our votes.
We are coming into what I hope will be a hard-fought-for mayoral race. You know, we don't need to coronate a mayor in this city or recycle one. I think it's important that we actually challenge anyone running for mayor and get better leadership. But, you know, that's my rant, which I've made many times. What do you want people to understand about your unhoused neighbors, about the encampment issue? Just, you know, from your perspective, what can we learn or think about or take away or do even more to help you?
I guess just like acknowledging that unhoused people are people, seeing people's humanities, and also just supporting the work that's happening locally, like with activists on the ground and people who are trying to support communities who are otherwise unsupported.
And do you think that is something that is best done with people writing a check or sending an e-transfer, or is it about being out there at the parks? I mean, what, from your vantage point, what is most effective? What is the ask, if you will?
Mm-hmm. Financial donations are always helpful, I think, for small orgs who are doing frontline work. But I think being present is also something that's really valued. There are a lot of people who have, over the years, signed up to delegate even at council, and that's something that's also useful. Mm-hmm. And letter writing and just staying in touch with what's happening online.
And how are you personally doing now that the charges are dropped? How are your physical injuries? Like, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm still healing. Physically and mentally. And I'm just relieved that the charges are dropped. And I just have a lot of gratitude and thanks for the community that helped us get here. We definitely didn't do this on our own. Mm-hmm. And I also will say that the fight's not over. We know that there are a number of people in Toronto, mm-hmm. after the events at Lamport Stadium and Trinity Bellwoods, housing advocates who are still going through a number of serious charges. And so I'd like to redirect folks to think about that and support them, it's just connected. We stand for the same things, and so people should pay attention.
Well, I can't thank you enough for the work that you do. I just can't. And I hope that you heal completely in all ways. And your strength and your courage and your wisdom at 25. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking about what I was thinking about at 25, and it was not what you're thinking about. And I want you to know, my kids wanted me to tell you both. I mean, Sarah, Jama, you already know that my daughter put you as a human rights hero for her school project in grade 6. You are heroes. You're doing amazing work. And my kids wanted you both to know that you should have never been arrested in the first place. They think it was ridiculous, and that they just wanted me to say hi to you both. So there you go. Thank you both, Sarah SOUDI and Sarah Jama. The Sarahs are doing such great work for our city. Please stay safe. We're still in a pandemic, and I wish you all the very best. And thank you for being the voices that people trust on the issues that they care about and doing the OShow.